Y'all may be seated. Good morning, saints. Good morning, sinners. How was your football Saturday yesterday, huh? We got some good socks on today, so it was a good day. It was a good day. As a child growing up in the church, I often didn't see the point in it. It was a confusing time for me. It was a confusing hour out of all the other hours in my week because it looked so different. I was asked to put on nice clothes. My parents made me sit still and be quiet. Too often in the church, the things that were being talked about went way over my head. And I remember that my number one source of frustration during that time was trying to follow along in the worship service itself. We would get just a small bulletin that only had the hymn numbers printed in there, and I would often confuse the hymn numbers for page numbers, right? Those of you familiar with our hymnals know that sometimes the numbers refer just to page numbers in the front, and sometimes they refer to the hymn numbers that are in the back. And I always found myself choosing the wrong one. And I thought I would get ahead and look ahead, and they would be on a different page. And by the time I flipped to that page, it was just over, and I was just so done. I was frustrated with it. So I didn't see the point in church. I didn't see the point because I thought I could be doing so many other great things with my life right now as a little kid, right? I could be sleeping in, watching cartoons, playing outside with my friends, anything but being in a stuffy place with people I didn't know. I didn't see the point in it as a kid. As a teen, the point of church for me became just connecting with my friends. And I showed up early to meet my friends in the youth group, and we all hung out together. We would sit in the back pew, and we would talk through the whole church service, right? We would just be going at it with each other through the whole service. And adults would be looking at us, and they would glare at us. They wouldn't say anything because they were just happy that kids were in worship, right? They didn't want to run us out. Little did I know that those who talk through worship as a teen, you become a pastor later on in life. I wish someone had let me know that. But church for me was all about just meeting up with my friends. During my teen years, I began to ask myself and find the answer to a big question. I think it's a question that all teenagers are asking themselves, and the question is, who am I? It's a question of identity. During that time in your life, you're trying to figure out just exactly who you are. For so long, you have been a part of your family system. Your parents have told you who you are. But as a teen, you start to exert that independence and find out for yourself just who am I as a human being. And there's all kinds of fun places to be able to turn to figure out what your identity is. As a teen, I turned to 3 different places to kind of figure out who I was. For the first 8 years of my life, I grew up in Chicago with all my dad's family were up there. And then we moved when I was 8 to Wichita Falls, Texas. But my heart never left Chicago. So I turned to all kinds of Chicago sports to claim my identity. The Cubs and the White Sox and the Blackhawks, I owned all the gear. The Bulls, and it was great because Michael Jordan was playing for them. It was a fun time to watch the Bulls. And then the Bears, right? This is when the Bears mattered. It was fun. You know, they did the Super Bowl shuffle and all that great stuff that was happening. So I adopted my identity through Chicago sports. And I followed it, and I lived and I breathed it. I also turned to music as a teen, which is something that teens often do. And during that time, the alternative rock scene was getting really big, and I turned to all of those big rock groups that were just pounding the airwaves. Green Day and Smashing Pumpkins and the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Nirvana. These were the ones that I was listening to. There were some other things going on in the 90s, like those boy bands, the Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, and I left them all to the side, right? But I adopted the identity, and they had this really kind of this hard identity. Most of them came from the Pacific Northwest, and they all dressed in flannel. You cannot dress in flannel in North Central Texas, so I did not adopt the look of it. But I adopted their words and their attitude, and that became part of my identity. And also I turned to the military to figure out who I was. My dad worked on a flight line at Shepherd Air Force Base there in Wichita Falls, and I just found everything about the military fascinating. And I thought, this is the way that I want to order my life. And so I joined ROTC in high school, and I started doing all those things, military kinds of things that I could do to figure out who I was. And it was about the middle of my teenage years when my church took me on a spiritual retreat, and I had a religious experience. During that experience, my faith became alive, and my faith showed up to answer this question of who am I? My faith reminded me that I, first and foremost, am a child of God. And when I discovered that identity, it changed everything for me. It reordered everything. That simple phrase, Paul, you are a child of God, changed it all for me. We're starting a new sermon series in this church for the month of October. It's called Why Church Matters. Why Church Matters. I think we live in an unprecedented time in our culture of so many other available options to us than being a regular and consistent part of church. There's so many other things that we can do with our time on a Sunday morning or throughout the week rather than being a part of God's family. And so I think church matters a lot. I think church matters because I think it best answers this question of who am I? A question that we never really stop asking ourselves. Our world stands ready to offer us a multitude of identities to pick up. It is ready to give us all kinds of things to put on ourselves so we can figure out just exactly who we are. Just a few are sports. Sports is a huge identity for us as a culture. Whether you play it, whether you watch it, whether you're taking kids to and fro, sports consume so much of our weeks and so much of our identity. Work consumes a lot of our lives and how much we are invested in work and the question of whether we even truly leave our work anymore these days. Work is an identity that's placed on us about how much you can produce, how much you can contribute to the work of your team. And then in this season of political kind of nastiness, there are political affiliations that folks are really trying hard to pinpoint and put on each of us. So these political affiliations, are you left or are you right? And all I have to do is say one of those words, and I know exactly what you're about in your life these days. That sense of political identity is something that the world is trying to offer us as a primary identity. And when these identities become the primary identity for us, and it becomes the highest priority for us, we will navigate and push aside a lot of things in our lives in order to serve those identities. We'll sacrifice our time, our wealth, our relationships, and our presence for these things. For sports, how much does fan gear cost anymore? And tickets, and all of that equipment. I'm paying money to wear socks, right? We will just give whatever we want. How much time does it go into watching a game, right? And we will create space in order to be able to do that in our lives because it serves our identity. Or for work, how many of us ever truly leave work? How many of you have ever answered an email after you've left the office for the day? Or you continue working the solution to the problem long after you've put the kids to bed and as you yourself are getting ready for bed. Work consumes all of that time. And then the political affiliations, I don't know if I really need to say much about these days in terms of how we serve those identities. We make them primary for us in our lives. The problem with all these identities that the world offers to us is that they are weak. They are anemic. They can't fully answer this question of, who am I? A few years ago, Susan and I were at a conference for senior pastors, and we were in Florida for this conference. And I love this conference because you do a lot of work in the morning and the afternoon, and then they give you some free time to go and play and hang out and network with each other. And so anytime we're near a big body of water, especially in Florida, Susan's trying to organize a fishing trip for us. And so she got a boat and a charter, and it came to our hotel and picked up her and me and several of our pastor friends, and we went out for several hours on the water, and it was great. We had a great time out there. I believe she caught more fish than all the other guys in the boat because she is that good of a fisherman. She's nodded her head, yes. Even if she didn't, she caught them all, right? So that's, And we had a great time being out on the water. And as the captain was bringing us back to our dock for the end of the day, he finally asked a question. He said, so what are y'all doing in Florida? And so this Lutheran pastors guy looked at him and said, well, we're Lutheran senior pastors and we're here for a conference. At which point he got really quiet. Captains of a boat, so they have some salty language that they use. And in his quietness and his silence, I didn't know if he was kind of replaying all the conversations he had with us and if he was regretting saying anything. This is a common experience, a phenomenon that I have with people a lot. But he actually wasn't doing that. He was thinking. And he said this to us. He said, as a kid, I used to go to church, and it didn't do much for me. He goes, this here He pointed at his boat. This is my church. These fish out here, that's my congregation. These waters, that's my sanctuary. This is my holy time with God out here. And I heard that, and we all heard that, and we sat back, and in one aspect, I admired him. I admired him because I enjoy being out in God's good creation and the vastness of that and experiencing the wonder and the majesty of it all. And this guy got to do that full time and get paid for it. What a wonderful experience for him. But I also pitied him because his identity was caught up in all of that. And it wasn't until much later that I thought of this question. I wish I would have asked him that question in that moment. But I wanted to say, Captain, when you die, will the fish bury you? Will these waters come and comfort your family? Will this boat preside at your funeral? Or what happens when you're no longer to be able to be out on this boat and be in this place? What happens for you? Will the fish bury you? Will sports preside at your funeral? Will work stop long enough in order to recognize your absence, or will it continue and just plug someone else into your place? Will those political talking figures show up and comfort your family when you're gone? Will the fish bury you? Those identities cannot answer this question of who am I? They were never intended to. They weren't built for that. But the church is built for that. God has given us a process to be able to answer this question for us and for all people, and this process is baptism. In this process, holy waters are poured. There's no water in there. What happened there? All right, so there you go. Holy waters. I don't want to steal Pastor Kate's thunder. She's going to pour those in there later on. But anyway, holy waters are poured over your head, and the cross is made on your forehead. And in that moment, you are named God's child, and you are given a place in God's family. And you are given important work to do that the Holy Spirit empowers you to do. The church creates a process that fully satisfies that answer, who am I? And it comes in a simple phrase. It says, you are God's child. You are a child of God. And that phrase comforts us at every stage in our lives. As little kids, it lets us know that God loves us and wants the best for us. As teens, it lets us know that we are forgiven when we make mistakes. As young adults, it anchors us when we're trying to make a name for ourselves and figure out these passions and talents that God has given to us. When we're in middle age, it centers us when we're questioning everything that we're up to in life and whether we want to continue on that course or not. When you retire, this phrase, you are a child of God, gives you purpose beyond your work into your retirement. And when you enter those twilight years of life, this phrase, you are God's child, comforts us because it lets us know that God has great things in store for us. You are God's child. As God's child, God wants you to live in a couple different ways in this world. Jesus gives us these images to think about that. He says, you are salt and you are light. You are light of the world, you are salt of the earth. Salt has two functions for us. The first function is that it preserves things from decaying. You can rub salt into meat and it will prevent that meat from decaying, right? And so salt is meant to be rubbed into those places that are decaying. Church should not be like a divine salt shaker experience, right? Where God has put us all together in one place. We are to be shaken into this world to prevent it from decaying, to add the things that God has given us into this world where death and destruction is. And I think about the work that we do in Haiti as we accompany families and children on the central plateau of the plains in Haiti who are at the most lowest parts of their life, the most extreme poverty that they can experience. No dignity, no value, a sense of human worth. They are totally overlooked. But we come, and God rubs us into their lives, and we invest in them, and we believe in them, and over the course of 12 to 18 months, their hope is restored, their dignity is received back, light shines in their eyes again. Salt is meant to help stop the decay. Salt also brings out the flavors of life. We had a really nice steak last night, so we were celebrating with a couple who just got married, and it was seasoned very well. But have you ever had a piece of steak that was not seasoned well at all? You're just looking for that salt because it brings out the flavors of life. Eugene Peterson says in his translation of the Bible called The Message, when you get to Matthew 5, he says, salt brings out the God flavors in life. And that's our job as salt, is to bring out the God flavors in life, to remind people that life just isn't as it seems, but there's something much deeper and much richer going on here. And so when you teach one of our children or one of our youth during that Connect hour, and you're investing in them and talking to them about your faith and talking to them about Jesus and their place here in the church, you're bringing out the God flavor of life for them. So salt prevents from decay, and it brings out the flavors of life. And then there's light. And light has two functions as well. The first function is that just a little bit of light will scatter the darkness. If you've ever been in a room and you just light one small candle and all of a sudden the room is bright, a little bit of light can scatter the darkness. And there are people all around us who are in dark places, and we're asked to be light in their darkness. I think of the work of our Stephen ministers who accompany people who are going through some difficult times in their lives, whether it be unemployment or grief or divorce or just moving and transition, kids leaving the nest. They walk alongside of you, and they share their light with you in that dark moment. Light scatters the darkness. And then light helps others to see. Light helps others to see. And we want people to see God. We want people to see God and God's Spirit available and present all around them, no matter where they are, not just in this hour where we're all here focused together, but everywhere throughout our week. I think of our event, the Preston Meadow Gives event that we had in March, where we gave you a lot of money, $150,000, and sent you out into the community and said, go take care of others or take care of the need that's on your heart. And that story grew and it blew up and it went viral. And I was watching just the traffic on social media, and I was watching the comments. And those comments were saying, finally, this is a church that I can get behind. I had forgotten how jaded people really are about the church outside of our community. How they look at the church and they see it as full of a bunch of hypocrites who are kind of an insiders club. There is a bad perception of church out there, and we have to help manage this. But this event, going out there and meeting people where they are, helping out different organizations, randomly surprising people who were in really troubling situations, it made all the difference. And what they saw in that moment wasn't just the kindness of your gift, but they saw God. Light helps others to see. I sometimes think about my life, what would happen if that moment, that religious moment, would have occurred for me, right? The power of this phrase, that you are God's child, changed everything for me. And my prayer every day is for you all as well, that you can know the good news, that you are God's child. This is your primary identity. God's got great things in store for you, and that you can begin to live out of that good news, to be salt and light for all others. Amen.